Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG, and I'm here with another campaign starter guide. This time we're looking at the Heralds of Ariel faction for the Wood Elves, playing on the Vortex map. They're the most recent Wood Elves faction and came alongside a significant rework to the Wood Elf race. Their campaign on the Vortex map is actually a pretty fun one. Things are a little different than your standard Vortex campaign, which is nice, plus their territory isn't all awkwardly squished against the side of the map like it is in the Mortal Empires map. In this guide, I'll be giving advice on how to start and complete this campaign. This means looking at things like building and army composition considerations, as well as creating some short-term goals and talking about long-term strategy. So, with that being said, let's get into the campaign and take a look. So, I've already got this campaign up here. We're just looking at it on turn 1 to kind of get an idea of how things start. In terms of building considerations, I feel like this campaign doesn't have anything super significant to take into account. It's pretty similar to another High Elf playthrough. There are a couple things I do want to touch on though. With the rework, settlement buildings don't actually cost growth points. So you can see, right, there's no growth point cost, whereas other buildings do. It's mostly their economic buildings, but you also, well, actually it's basically everything except for military recruitment. You can see military support, defense, infrastructure, those all cost growth, right? So growth is a significant factor in this campaign, especially in how it affects your economy, right? So one of the first things you're going to want is the growth building at the very least. You also are probably going to want Hawk Riders in this campaign. Like I talked about in my faction introduction, you get this Volley of Kurnos ability for Hawk Riders. If you've ever seen it in action, it's a very powerful ability for Hawk Riders to have. So that means you're going to want Hawk Riders. Well, you can get them from Tier 3 from the Flying building, or you can get them at Tier 2 from the Sacred Grounds of Anathrema building, right? And this also has some other bonuses to it. So this is definitely a powerful building. At some point in the campaign, you absolutely want this landmark building. Now, with the ammunition bonus, the fact that you're essentially an elven/missile-focused wood elf faction, you definitely want the archer building, right? But you also want to be able to make, you need money, you need the income in order to support your armies. So what you're probably going to want to do, you kind of want to split it 50-50. That's what I usually recommend for anybody, right? Where you want one economy building, one military building, right? We know that we want archers. They're going to be very strong in this campaign. We know that we want growth and the public order building as well. Or at least that's what I'd recommend. You could go for the income building, but these give enough income that this one's not going to be as important super early on. So it kind of leaves you in an awkward position, right? If we have 3 slots, we're probably going to do archers, growth, public order, right? If we get 2 more slots, well, we want Hawk Riders, but do we take this landmark building, or do we take this building to also get the Great Eagle? I think Great Eagles are a great addition early on in this campaign, right? If we take this and this, right, that's both of those building slots at Tier 2, right? And that is probably what I'd recommend, but then at Tier 3, you only have a single build slot, right? Do you want melee troops so that you can get some spearmen? If you want the spearmen, you probably want them to have shields, so where do you fit in the Ezra Forge? That also leaves out mages, and it also leaves out branch raids, which are the things that give you the troop replenishment, right? So it's definitely difficult. You have to try to balance and prioritize things in the early game. I'd even say you're probably going to want to hold off on this income building just because you want that variety, right? I also think, or I've at least been questioning, I don't think you really need the melee troops. Any other, faction, I'd say spearmen and archers, right? That's a pretty standard, consistent formation. But especially because these spearmen, to get them shields, requires a second building. Even though this building's good for construction cost reduction, my recommendation would be to skip it, right? Then you don't need these 2 buildings. You can get 1, 2 economy buildings, 3 for the archers, 4 for the Hawk Riders, 5 for the Eagles, and then 6 would probably be, even here it's a hard choice, right? Mages or branch raids. So what I'd really recommend is you pick something temporarily, right? You make this building, recruit 2 or 4 Eagles into your army, and then demolish it, right? And replace it with the Spellsinger building, or replace it with the Branch Wraith building, right? Or build this building, get your Branch Wraith recruit unlocked, recruit them, and then blow up this building, right? You could even go that route to ultimately land on the melee unit building and the armory building, right? So I know it's kind of confusing. It's hard to make a solid recommendation, but I basically am recommending you do a bit of building swapping in the early game. Even when you have like the 6 slots available to you, you don't have room for everything that you want. But just keep in mind that, especially for stuff like heroes, you can make this building to recruit them, recruit the hero, and then destroy the building. And it's even if it brings you below capacity, that's okay. Ultimately, when we're talking about this, I think it's kind of a decision you have to make for yourself. You have to determine your confidence. You have to determine your playstyle. You might say you don't need the Branch Wraith if you don't think you're going to need the replenishment because you go heavy into archers and magic and you successfully win fights with minimal casualties. You might just want the spears with the shields because that's a consistent playstyle that you're used to, right? So you might want to make some adjustments to your building selection and army composition based on what you're comfortable with. Another major thing I want to talk about is the elven settlements that you get here, right? The outposts and what you build in them. An important thing to note, or what I think is important, are these waystone buildings. When you have spare provinces, you want to stack as many of these as you can, because these give you growth to all provinces. That's especially important because, like I talked about, your economy buildings are the ones that require growth points in order to level them up in this campaign. So as much as you can stack like campaign-wide growth, you should. The only time I really use any of the other buildings are in like immediate areas, right? You can see like the recruitment cost and global recruitment, as well as like construction cost and growth for adjacent provinces, right? So you kind of want to take one province next to your main province and put those kinds of buildings in it. Maybe when you start fighting somebody, the first thing you put in the first settlement you capture from them is income from raising settlements and post-battle loot. But besides that, you really just want to stack the growth, right? That's what you want to do with the outpost buildings. The last thing is just a small little tip, but with a lot of the like major faction capitals throughout the world, you actually get an increase to, you can see here, income from all buildings 10% faction-wide for capturing these. So some people might recommend that you destroy all the settlements that you can, but really you do kind of want to take control of them, right? You want to stack the growth and you have the potential to actually increase your income. Even though it's not by a huge amount, everything that you can get in this campaign is really going to make a big difference because you have such a limited economy. So, since the Heralds of Ariel are like an elven unit and missile-focused faction of the Wood Elves, it kind of means that archers are your best units and melee infantry, melee infantry is your second best. Of course, I'm not really going to strongly recommend melee infantry. I'm going to recommend you stick with archers. Those are going to be the best units that you have in the game. Okay, you've got a good variety of options here. They're very strong. You can definitely consider shielded spearmen. I ended up using them for a while in this campaign. It's a good option, and it's just like it's pretty standard, right? It's something that works for pretty much every faction. I do suggest getting a handful of Hawk Riders into each army. They're just because the volley of Kurnos is so strong. These are a pretty trashy unit otherwise, but especially in your Lord's army, they'll be really good. And with that volley of Kurnos, having a handful of them in any army is kind of like having artillery. That's what your artillery is. You can hit some really decent long-range snipes on some of their better units early on, right? I'd also recommend, eventually I do kind of recommend moving over to Treemen for Tar Pit in the late game. Those are probably going to be a better option than Eternal Guard. You have some research option to give them better missile resistance too, so they're not as vulnerable. I would recommend trying some flying units in the Sisters of Twilight army. The Great Eagle is going to be a good unit early on and will be versatile. And once you get into the late game, a couple of Treemen paired with a couple of Forest Dragons to kind of like cover the front lines while your archers have lots of room to shoot at enemies. I think that's going to be a great combo, right? You blob things up on the Treeman, you hit him with the Forest Dragon and then dive the Forest Dragon in, and all the while your archers are shooting at everything that's there, right? The last thing to consider is relative strength and cost effectiveness. I've been kind of stuck with this question and I'm still not sure if I have an answer. Are Way Watchers worth it? They're double the upkeep for Glade Guard, and are they that much better? They have slightly better range, but Glade Guard already have amazing range. They have armor piercing, but low tier Glade Guard with the Azray Forge also have armor piercing. They do have the omnidirectional movement, right? They're a little faster. They've got better bonuses, right? The Master Ambusher being able, like, that's the one big disadvantage the Glade Guard have. They can technically fire while moving forward, but they can't fire while moving backwards, right? They won't fire backwards like a Way Watcher will. But again, even with the better damage stats on a Way Watcher, remember a Glade Guard has more models than a Way Watcher has. So whether these are worth it in the long run, I don't know if you even need to switch to Way Watchers, or maybe you can do kind of a split between Way Watchers and Glade Guards and get really good value out of them. That should cover everything that I wanted to talk about for the army composition segment. Really, it's fairly standard. The only real deviation is the Sisters of Twilight can lean a little more heavily into flying units. And but like I said, late game, I would say it probably looks like any other, Wood Elf Archer focus late game. With that being said, let's go back to the start of this campaign and kind of talk about some of our short-term goals. Alright, so we're back here on turn 2. We've moved things forward a little bit. Since you're the Wood Elves, you don't have the typical take over your starting province type of start, right? I mean, we start in the Witchwood. This is the only thing that we have. So you don't have to take over your province like you normally would. However, you do start at war with somebody. You start at war with this Broken Chains Greenskin tribe. So, ideally your first objective is to clean them up. It does kind of then lead you to see this as the province that you should start with. And even though you won't get the same kind of value out of this that, a normal faction would, like a settlement-based faction, you can still get some good stuff out of here, right? You can at least get some growth going in your adjacent province and be able to get, like, recruitment costs down, global recruitment, well, but that's for local armies. At least you can get the construction costs and the growth bonuses. Just something to consider. So you can take over, like, this nearby province, get control of that. With Tyrant Peak, sometimes when I play this campaign, I like to destroy this. You raise it, you get the money, leave it for the Tomb Kings, but the Tomb Kings never take it, so you're probably better off just taking it for yourself. Whatever way you decide to go, you kind of want to get all of these so you can start getting your forest health going in the right direction and start getting yourself bonuses. As you can see, getting just one tier up gives you a big upkeep reduction for all your armies, right? As you're going through and fighting the Broken Chains, I do also recommend, like, for short term, recruiting an additional Lord, right? Because most of these are ruins, and if you can have that Lord kind of scoop up some of these ruins in the early game, instead of having to commit a full army, lose all your units, and wait several turns, I'd recommend that as well. Another thing to keep in mind, don't forget that you will end up at war with Clan Molder pretty much the minute you find them. And in the early game, when they have nothing better to do, it's very likely that they will show up and try to take some of your outposts down. So eventually you will want to consider raising a second army. Basically as soon as you can afford it, just to kind of protect your area while your main army's out doing things. The next target you should have, once you've started to, settle some of these ruins and you've taken out the Broken Chains, is going to be Morathi and the Cult of Pleasure. If you don't take care of her early on, she'll start to snowball and become very powerful. She's also going to spread Chaos Corruption, which is just going to cause issues for you. And generally speaking, it's likely that she will just declare war on you early in the game anyway. Once you've taken Morathi out, you'll see that you have a pretty decent visual buffer around your territory, which should kind of help you feel a little bit safer. At this point, the next thing you want to do is decide which of these other elven settlements you're going to want to go to and try and occupy, right? You really won't increase your income unless you take another settlement, like another actual wood elf magical forest settlement, because that's the only way you're going to get your real economy buildings in there, right? You will have plenty of spending money from combat and looting, and it's likely by this point you'll have grown enough to afford a second army. That means that you can leave that second army behind to defend your territory while your main army goes to the next area and takes care of whatever business needs to be taken care of, right? Taking another city allows you to increase your income, expand your hero capacity, and ideally get some additional units available to recruit. It'll also start getting you on the path to increasing that magical forest and getting some of the bonuses. So this point is really what I would say marks the end of the early game, right? Your short-term goals are to wipe out the Broken Chains tribe and the Cult of Pleasure faction, right? And take over as much of this territory as you can. I mean, again, you can see there's a bunch of little ruins that you can just grab, and gives you even just 5 growth a turn is going to help accelerate the growth of your economy. It also gives you this visual buffer so that I know if my settlement is going to be threatened well before it happens. So since that covers everything we want to talk about for short-term goals, let's talk long-term strategy. First question you want to ask yourself here is, which settlement do you want to take next, right? It might depend on the events that happen, because there is eventually an event that triggers that basically allows you to get the Gaian Veil for free by defeating an army there. But even Orion's Camp has a mission for that too. Really what you want to look at is what the bonuses are, right? Every one of these forests will give you a diplomatic bonus with whatever like race is nearby or primarily located in that territory. It shouldn't be the only deciding factor in where you want to go, but it should at least be a consideration. The reason that I say that is because eventually you will end up at war with one of these major powers, right? You have a decent variety of options. Really, anything but the Skaven is viable, right? I don't know if I'd really say the Tomb Kings are going to be a reliable ally, but you can go with the Lizardmen, the High Elves, or you can even try to get relations with the Dark Elves, right? The main issue is that it's very likely Naggarond will become too strong early on and won't like you enough to leave you alive. They will constantly demand tributes of you, which, I kind of recommend you pay because it'll keep them off your back for a while, but actually getting them to agree to deals can be difficult, and getting them to honor them is not likely when they're so strong. In this campaign, I actually ended up allying with the High Elves just because this ended up being the first and easiest territory for me to take. They're already very friendly with me. There's some research bonuses you can get for that, as well as, I believe, a skill on your Legendary Lord. However, what I did want to do was actually take the Sacred Pools, because I thought the Lizardmen would make a good ally. They're right here to the south, so then it's a nice buffer, and I don't have to worry about weird invasions from my south. You also get the Casualty Replenishment and Growth bonus from there, so that really helps boost you along in the early game when you need it most. But that being said, really you can take any of these, right? Any one of these is going to be a viable option, and you just kind of have to navigate the diplomatic situation there. Once you've made yourself a plan with how to move forward and what area to occupy, the rest of the game is pretty much just following that plan, right? You want to build up the other forests to get the bonuses from them. You'll want to do the rebirth ritual when you can to lock in that level and just give you something to do to pass the time as well, I guess. It's also quite likely that your primary forest will max out before you can even complete the ritual on the second forest, though that kind of depends on how aggressive you are in taking the forest versus defending and expanding your territory back at home. You want to use the decision you made about who to ally to help navigate the battles surrounding the other forests, right? Not like there's High Elves. Well, I mean, there is High Elves down here in the southwest, right? So not every region has somebody to ally with and somebody to fight that are all of the same race, but you should be able to kind of use your best judgment to make those sorts of decisions. Typically, you'll be fighting against the forces of destruction in support of forces of order, but as the Wood Elves, you really can do either. Like I said, you won't really be able to ally with the Skaven very well, probably not the vampires either, but the Dark Elves are an option. As long as you stay on track with your plan, the final ritual will be ready for you to activate in no time, and then all you have to do is complete it. With that being said, that's pretty much the gist of the long-term strategy for this campaign. If you can make it through that first segment in the early game and just successfully defend your territory, expand your borders a little bit, and then take another major forest settlement, you pretty much just repeat that process until you're done with the campaign. So I hope that you found this guide useful. I hope that you learned some good tips and tricks for how to complete this campaign on your own. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below and I'd be happy to see them. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you all have a wonderful day and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.